Chief Nnanka leaned in close, his breath thick with alcohol, his voice low but charged with menace. Words on the street is that the old man has chosen you as his successor. He spat, his eyes locked onto Chris. He's always been your godfather. But I tell you something for nothing, you have challengers, big opponents. You don't want to make enemies of them. Chris sat still, his face unreadable. He could see the fury growing in the chief's eyes, the drunken haze fueling his paranoia. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with cigar smoke and the scent of whiskey. The chief sighed heavily, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished table. The truth was clear. The party did not decide the gubernatorial candidate. The governor did. And the governor had stolen enough money to buy anyone, even the party itself. Chris knew it too. The party chairman, powerless, the delegates, bought and paid for. The system was rigged, and Chief Nnanka was simply a well-fed cog in the machine. Chief Nnanka had built his empire through the governor's wife. He had fronted massive contracts for her, ghost projects, inflated deals, paperwork that never saw the light of day. The money flowed like a river, unchecked, unquestioned. The First Lady's influence was absolute. Government officials didn't dare refuse her, knowing that their cut was already embedded in the process. It was the I chop, you chop principle. Everyone fed from the same corrupt system. The government treasury had become her personal ATM, and Chief Nnanka held the PIN codes. With every fraudulent contract, his political clout grew, his pockets deepened, and his arrogance swelled. Despite the storm of enemies within the house, the governor stood unshaken. Impeachment whispers floated through the halls, but they never took root. Chris had seen to that. He was the governor's most trusted ally, the hidden force in the House of Assembly, the fixer who ensured that money flowed through the right hands, loyal, relentless, indispensable. The governor was more than a leader to him. He was a god. And Chris, his prophet, his overseer, the one who kept the temple standing. Chief Nnanka had orchestrated Chris's rise, but the plan had backfired spectacularly. Chris now had direct access to the governor, unrestricted, unfiltered, and that, more than anything, filled Chief Nnanka with quiet rage. In his perfect scheme, all negotiation, all transactions should have passed through him. He was the party chairman, the gatekeeper, the man who decided whose palms got greased. But Chris had found a way to outflank him, to bypass his influence, and that burned like acid in his chest. Yet, there was a Wari proverb he knew well. Na determination they make Okada overtake trailer for road. Chris was the reckless Okada, swerving past giants, and for now, there was nothing Chief Nnanka could do about it. Chief Nnanka had built his legacy on political brutality. As party chairman, he had crushed careers with a single word, destroyed ambitions with the stroke of a pen. Disloyalty? Unacceptable. Politicians who smiled at the governor in the daylight but whispered treachery at night were met with thunderous consequences. His reputation for ruthlessness was legend, and that was why Chris's defiance was intolerable. The governor applauded Nnanka's iron grip, praised his talent for political warfare. But now, Chris was rewriting the rules. It was a challenge he couldn't ignore. Chief Nnanka sat swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. His face was set in a scowl, his mind replaying the betrayal he felt. Chris, his Chris, the man he had plucked from obscurity, the starving lecturer who couldn't even afford fuel for his rickety car, had now become the governor's heir apparent. It gnawed at him like a disease. He had spent years nurturing loyalty within the party, making sure the grassroots stayed faithful, and yet, when the time came to choose a successor, it wasn't him, it was Chris. The puppy he had once fed had now grown sharp teeth, and worse, it had bitten him. Barrister Soko returned to the room, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Important call from London," he muttered, taking a sip of his brandy. He didn't elaborate, and nobody asked. Chris sat calmly, knowing the weight of Chief Nnanka's gaze was on him. The air was thick with tension. Then Nnanka grinned, a slow, knowing smile, the kind that carried a warning beneath its surface. "The governor must sleep peacefully every night when he thinks of you," he said, his voice dripping with something between mockery and admiration. "You're his sleeping pill. With you in post and in charge, there would be no from power to prison for him." The room fell silent. Chris met his gaze but said nothing. Barrister Soko adjusted his robe, watching as Chief Nnanka strutted down the corridor with his latest appointment, a young woman barely in her 20s. He could barely hold back his laughter. "Look at the man who wants to be governor," he muttered under his breath. "He's a joke. Can someone please tell him that? The only brain box he has is between his legs." His words dripped with sarcasm, but there was truth in them. Nnanka had power, money, and influence, yet he was ruled by his impulses, particularly those concerning women. Chris sat back, trying to process what had just happened. He shook his head, his hands turning upward in disbelief. Was he expecting that girl? He asked, his voice laced with both frustration and curiosity. Barrister Soko chuckled, sipping his drink. "Don't worry about him," he said casually. "He can never get enough of women." Chris exhaled, running a hand down his face. He had seen many things in politics, but Nnanka's shamelessness still amazed him. Barrister Soko leaned forward, lowering his voice. Chief Nnanka was more than just an ambitious politician. He was the definition of what power meant in this country, hungry for wealth, obsessed with status, and insatiable when it came to pleasure. He oozed testosterone, behaving like a cockerel, ready to mount any hen that so much as glanced his way. It was a game to him. Women, money, influence. Everything was about how much he could take and how many people he could outmaneuver. And the barrister? He had always known this about men like Chief Nnanka. It was why he played the game so well. The country had long accepted that elections were not just about votes. There were two contests, one at the ballot box, which was often rigged, and the other in the courts, where the real battle was fought. Losing in court meant losing everything. It wasn't uncommon for a candidate who finished last in the polls to emerge as the winner after a court ruling. It was pure chaos, like a stampede in Balogun Market, where anything could happen. And the politicians, they loved it. Some political analysts whispered the hard truth. Winning the court battle had become more important than winning votes. Any smart politician knew to invest in the judiciary rather than waste money stuffing ballot boxes. It was this reality that kept Barrister Soko indispensable. He was the fixer the man who knew his way around the justice system. In a country obsessed with wealth, he played in the Premier League. Barrister Soko had more judges in his pocket than a mafia don. He often smirked and said, "There are plenty of us around. If I don't do it, another bastard will." His political patrons protected him, and he made sure they won, no matter how dirty the job. It was a trade, a symbiotic relationship of power, influence, and corruption. From the moment Barrister Soko was a struggling lawyer, he understood the game. He didn't need to know the law. He just needed to know the judges. That was his golden rule. His biggest victory? Helping a candidate who placed fifth in an election become a senator. A court-elected senator. It was his masterpiece, and proof that in this country, INEC had no final say. The judges did. The crowd roared in celebration, machetes slicing through the air as they danced with wild joy. But the real victory had not been won at the ballot box. It was sealed in dark, quiet rooms, where men like Barrister Soko handed over Ghana must-go bags stuffed with cash to judges. These men, self-made kings of a corrupt system, stood tall in government houses, walked with swagger through state assemblies, and drove through the streets in convoys that commanded attention. The people cheered them, not because they were loved, but because they were feared. It was after the last election that Barrister Soko met Honorable Chris Ikeka. They built a strong rapport, a friendship born out of necessity. Chris needed protection, and Soko knew just how to provide it. When Ikeka's opponents dragged him to the electoral tribunal, claiming massive fraud, Soko made sure the judge dismissed the case for a price. From that day, Chris Ikeka was his client. Through him, Soko gained something even greater, the ear of the state governor. Now, his name carried weight in every room he entered. Barrister Soko was a man with a mission. He was the middleman, the fixer, the one who made things happen. Like a JCB bulldozer, he crushed obstacles without concern for the destruction left behind. He had long buried any sense of morality. He had learned to silence any remaining decency within himself. After all, he told himself, I am just a lawyer doing my job. Barrister Soko had perfected his art, making judges feel like they were simply taking their own share of the national cake. Think of it as your pension, he would say with a grin, passing them their cut in foreign currency. If they preferred, he could send it abroad, to accounts hidden in offshore tax havens, far from the prying eyes of EFCC. All they had to do was play ball, and many did. Soko didn't elect leaders, he imposed them. His work had nothing to do with democracy. It was an auction, and only the highest bidder won. The process he facilitated was no different from the ballot-stuffing thugs outside. Only his work was done in designer suits and polished courtrooms. It was a well-dressed scam, a pretend democracy,